Hi, everybody. It's good to be with you tonight. We are, as Sarah said, going to get into chapter 9, and chapter 9 is pornography, with the subtitle in that chapter of, it's not technically sex if you're by yourself, right? Which is some of the confusion that's out there, and we're going to be looking at the answers to that as we go through some of the things that we're focused on in chapter 9. First of all, the scope of the problem. They gave a lot of statistics in the book that were pretty overwhelming. I have heard, it wasn't in the book, but I've heard that America's #1 export to the world, money-making export to the world, is pornography, which is very disturbing, very sad, and just sad. And it's amazing God's grace and His mercy on us when we've gotten so confused that that's our export to the world. But in the book, she talks about the world's largest porn conglomerate has reported 42 billion visitors to their site in 2019. Covenant Eyes reports that half of pastors struggle with porn, and 57% of youth pastors fear their porn addiction being discovered. 90% of teens and 96% of younger adults are either neutral, accepting, or encouraging of porn consumption. By 5th grade, 90% of boys have been exposed to porn, and the average age of the first exposure is 8 years old. A few years ago, I remember that statistic being that the average age was 10, and now it's going younger. And you all are on the front lines of this, raising kids in this generation. No other parents have had to do this with this kind of access, right at your kids' and grandkids' fingertips. So it is a new territory that we are all facing. But again, for such a time as this is no surprise to God. He knew that when He created the world, that this would be a challenge for this generation. The statistics say that by 18 years old, 60% of girls have been exposed to porn. So in those ages, the neuroscientists tell us that the brain is still developing up until about 23, 24, maybe even 25 years old for girls, a little longer for girls, in that prefrontal cortex being developed. And we know that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you're experiencing something and it's firing up neurons in your brain, then they become bonded in the chemical processes of the brain. So that results that kids are easily wired into this craving for porn after even one exposure. The results have lifelong consequences on how they see the opposite sex and how they relate in relationships. And the chemicals that are released in the brain with the viewing of porn is the most powerful drug in the world, because it's the chemical reactions God built in our brain for bonding and attachment, but they're being misused with the release of those chemicals around the viewing of pornography. And those chemicals are the same chemicals that are released in sexual arousal and in intercourse. Oxytocin, vasopressin, those are the chemicals that God created in our brain to lead to the bonding experience. Dopamine is the chemical that's released in our brain for both pleasure and potentially it can cause addiction when it is firing together and wiring together with porn use. These chemicals in themselves are just value neutral. They just do what they do. They don't discern right and wrong. They're just doing what the body was created to do. Vasopressin and oxytocin, the same chemicals that are released when a new mom holds her baby and is nursing or feeding her baby, that bonding chemical that's releasing then is the vasopressin and the oxytocin. It's also released in orgasm, and it causes the bonding that is designed to occur in the marriage relationship. When they are released, desires, motivations, attractions become directed to whoever and whatever is around when that burst of oxytocin hits our brain. God's design is great. It helps us to bond to our spouse. That's what He created it for. But because of sin, because of the fallen nature, we have, of course, been misusing God's design since the beginning, but in this period of time of our history, with social media, with the technology as rampant, technology is a blessing, and I want to stand up here and say that technology is not great. God's using it for wonderful things, but the misuse of it with pornography, of course, is the curse of it. So when those chemicals are released while viewing porn, the human brain actually becomes wired then to crave a two-dimensional image over a real human person. We bond to the screen or to the image. I've gone to trainings and workshops that Bethesda workshop out in Franklin. Marnie Ferrer, the founding director of that organization, I've gone to some of her workshops, and she talks about how pornography really isn't as much about sex as it is about the inability to bond and attach to a real human. And the person gets wired together in their craving of that sexual experience in a two-dimensional way through a screen or a picture. Neurologically, orgasm causes you to prefer the person or the thing to whom your orgasm is attached and causes you to seek their attention or affection for future sexual experiences. Again, it was God's plan, God's design, a beautiful design, but it's been perverted through the use of pornography. And when there isn't another person to seek or the image is constantly changing, then that breaks down the brain, and that the brain gets used to the bonds breaking over and over again. And we get to the point of thinking that bond breaking is normal. Some of the research I've heard says that girls who have multiple sexual partners over and over again report that to them sex means nothing. And so it makes sense if you realize just what's going on in the neurological function of the brain, that the just bond broken, bond broken, bond broken. This causes difficulty to bond with a real person in the future and in future relationships. If there is bonding in the future, then the bonding is weak because it's so used to be broken that the strength of the bond isn't what it would have been if the person had waited until marriage or had resisted being addicted to the pornography. And then the other chemical is the dopamine. That's the pleasure chemical that's released in our brain. It's the reward chemical in our brain. And the release of the dopamine makes the porn addictive. It's the same thing that makes us addicted to, picking up your phone. They say we have a craving to pick up our phone now every, 12 seconds or something. And there's a dopamine release even with neutral things like this, but definitely that dopamine is released when a person is viewing pornography. And our system can only handle so much of the dopamine. The dopamine receptors in the brain bind to the dopamine, and when the brain is constantly flooded with the dopamine, then the brain says, well, we don't need all these receptors, let's get rid of some of them, and the brain then becomes desensitized to pleasure. Then normal things can't bring pleasure, like playing a board game, eating an apple, taking a walk, just the day in and day out small pleasures that we get. After all of those dopamine receptors have been eliminated from the brain, it takes a person, it's the whole addiction cycle, actually. It's the same as in crack cocaine. It takes a person a while to restore their brain beyond just stopping the addiction, stopping the use of porn. Then there has to be a period of time where healing and restoration. The beautiful thing about the brain, as God has designed it, is we have neuroplasticity. So what we do lose, it can be restored. But this explains also the rampant reporting of depression connected with people using pornography. Then the brain needs more dopamine, which causes the person to be drawn back into another experience with the porn. It's just a vicious cycle. And then comes in porn and violence. Because of the decrease of the dopamine receptors in the brain, there's an increase in the consumption that's needed, and not only the amount of porn, but the type of porn to experience the same euphoria. So the more habituated the user is to watching the act of sex, the less sexually stimulated they become. So this causes a craving into a shocking and more violent form of sex to be aroused, to meet that level of that craving that the brain is calling for. And there's a scientific link between real-life sexual violence and viewing sexual porn. And I remember in my early 20s, I had read that statistic that long ago, and I went to my local grocery store, and at that point, they didn't have magazines covered up. They just had, Playboy just right there on the shelf with Good Housekeeping and the kids' magazines. So I just go over to the manager of the store, and I said, did you know that there was a study out of the University of Minnesota that showed in neighborhoods where porn was on the shelves, in gas stations, grocery stores, just the area that there was a stronger reporting by the police of sexual violence against women? He went immediately, when I told him that, he didn't know me from Adam, he went immediately and got a grocery cart and started throwing all those pornography, Penthouse, Playboy, all those magazines in the grocery cart, which was just amazing to me that one simple little fact like that had such a powerful impact on somebody who, heard me and believed it. That's the kind of power that God gives us and influence that He gives us in this culture. I know it's not just the magazines anymore. It's way beyond that, but God's big enough too, even with this, that we have influence, that He's allowing us to be the salt and light in this culture. So how does this affect boys and girls, teenage boys and girls relationships, or even younger boys and girls relationships? Well, the boys are groomed to consume and the girls are groomed to perform. Girls don't wake up one morning and just suddenly want to use their body to get sexual attraction from boys. They are conditioned. It's the dopamine again. It's released when social media posts are liked. When we hit that little like button and we look and see that somebody liked our post, there's a little jolt of dopamine in our brain. And to keep the dopamine flowing, social media feeds have tailored their, and if any of y'all watched that movie last year, I think it was called Social Dilemma, about what they've really found out, I see a lot of heads shaking, of what it's doing to the brain with those likes, and it's addictive too. And so each like equals that dopamine release. And through childhood, girls are also watching the sexualization of women in our media, in movies, in magazines, in music videos, even their dolls they play with. There's a lot of dolls that are very sexualized. So they get a cell phone and then they move into the position of being the performer to get those likes, to get that dopamine release. And then boys are being conditioned to like what they see in the porn. The girls are being conditioned to perform to make the boys like them. And it's a powerful thing for girls. Girls like that power of having that influence over guys to get their attention, to get their interest. And they're having sex at younger ages to get the boys to do what they want them to do. And girls are suddenly worried about what they look like while having sex. One doctor reported that even 9-year-olds, a plastic surgeon came looking for plastic surgery to alter the appearance of their vulva because they didn't like the way their body looked. At 9 years old. Well, kids are spending 6.5 hours a day on average on media, so that's a lot of influence on the brain. That's a lot of dopamine craving that's going on there. Boys usually are recording themselves playing sports, doing goofy stunts. Girls get trapped, though, in this comparison game, and they use the filters and they use sexualized content to get that attention and attraction. The porn causes objectification, seeing a person as an object just like you would see your computer or a pair of scissors. You want the object because you want it to perform or function for you. And you think, I'll keep this object as long as it performs for me what I need for it to perform. I don't love the object, not in a way you would love humans, and you discard it or get rid of it when you're done with it, when it quits meeting the need, and the attachment is very temporary. Well, that's how boys and girls, teenage boys and girls, anyone, even adults, begin to view each other with that goal of objectification and not seeing the person as who they really are, which leads to the second consequence, which is dehumanization, stripping the person of their human rights. Men and women are image bearers of the Most High God. We carry inherent worth. We have free minds, choices, and emotions. But the dehumanization takes all that out. And in the history of the world, whenever there has been some of the most evil things perpetrated on human beings against other human beings, it's been because of dehumanization. If you think about the Jews in the era of Hitler and the Nazis, they dehumanized the Jews to be able to get that kind of control over them. When we think about slaves in the history of America, slaves in the history of the world, people had to dehumanize them to have slavery and to use that person, again, more like an animal would be used than as an actual human being. And then in the last 50 years in our country, with the passing of Roe versus Wade, we had to dehumanize the unborn by calling it tissue or a fetus. And so a great evil has been perpetrated on humans because of that dehumanization in these three cases and in other cases. And it's a dangerous road. It teaches girls that they are here for boys' pleasure. And at the end of the day, it teaches we're all just creatures. We can do whatever we feel like. It doesn't matter who we have sex with or what we watch. It's just if it feels good, do it. When I think about in the Garden of Eden and how God brought all the animals to Adam to name them, God was sending an unspoken message to Adam, like, look at all these animals. You are different. You're not just a creature. You were made in my image. But the enemy came into the garden and he told Adam and Eve, you're not anything special. You can't trust God in what he's saying. If it feels good, just eat that fruit. Just do it. And that's that message. You're just a creature. Just do what your instincts are telling you to do. Well, that's the message in the core of the porn issue. And nothing's changed. Nothing new under the sun, because the enemy is not creative. He has nothing new to throw at us. He just comes at different avenues, different pathways, doing the same old, same old. So what do we do? In the book, Hillary and Amy give the ROAR acronym each chapter to give you some action steps. And the first action step is the R, the ROAR. Recognize the message. What are those messages that porn is speaking? That women are always in the mood for sex? Not true. That women enjoy being degraded and objectified? Not true. That porn sex equals normal sex? Not true, but that's the message that's being yelled at our culture over and over again through all of these different avenues. It might feel like the enemy is winning. I mean, these are big numbers. This is a big problem, but when we look at the Word of God, it was just at times like this that he moved in and did something amazing. Think about the children of Israel at the Red Sea. They thought they were hopeless. Think about Joseph when he was thrown into the prison. He thought it was over. It was hopeless. Think about the disciples that night after Jesus was crucified. They thought it was over, but God. And so with this pornography issue that we're facing as a culture, but God. He's raising up, using you moms and grandmoms to raise up a generation that's going to stand against this message because we recognize the message. The O is all for discernment. The lies being told, the 4 big lies, or porn isn't a big deal. Well, if you built a fire on your couch instead of your fireplace, would that be a big deal? You'd still have a warm fire to sit by, but you wouldn't be sitting there. You would be running from the destruction of your house coming down. That's exactly what happens when we mess around with porn. We are burning down our house. Next slide. It's a moral alternative to sex. Well, at least I'm not having sex with strangers or just my boyfriend. I'm just using porn. But as we've just talked about, the brain. You can't just look at porn and say it's not sex. It is releasing the same chemicals, the same processes, the same bonding in the brain as if you were having sex. Third lie, porn is harmless. Well, boys are reporting younger and younger erectile dysfunction. The rewiring of the brain is happening in boys and girls both. It's causing bonding and attachment issues, and it's causing depression. And then lie number 4 is porn can be empowering. Porn is slavery. It is not empowering. It's bondage and it's slavery. Then the A, argue for a healthier approach. Reject the cheap counterfeit. We must keep reminding our kids, our grandkids, all that we have influence over, that sex was created for a husband and a wife. That's it. That's the context. That's the fireplace. If you put the fire in that context, nobody gets burned. What and who you have orgasm with matters to God. Strive for God's best. And then the R is reinforced through discussion, discipleship, and prayer. And they give some great tips like the password protection, your Hulu, your Netflix, Amazon Prime, all of those different streaming services you use. Make sure there's password protection. I worked with a mom once that her kids were always scheming to get those passwords, so every night she changed the password. She was very tech savvy. Use filters on devices like Custodio is one my daughter and son-in-law use that they really find to be a good tool for them. No devices in bedrooms or bathrooms. That's a great boundary to have. And then prepare your kids for when they do see porn. According to these statistics, they're going to see it sooner or later. So have those conversations. Even be careful with YouTube and YouTube Kids. A mom told me recently that her 1-year-old was watching a video on YouTube Kids and up popped this commercial of this woman in this very tight, shiny black cat suit, and then there was a man sitting in a chair watching her, like with that look of that he was a predator. That was on a 1-year-old's video. Help kids to foster healthy relationships so that they are bonding and attaching to real humans in person. Make your house a house that people want to congregate at. Have the kids over. No social media until they are in high school, junior and senior high. And no cell phones with apps until those later years of high school. That gives the brain a time to develop. Now, you're going to get pushback on that. You're going to be so counterculture on that, and that's going to be where you really need this last point and join with like-minded parents. Lou and I were just talking when we were raising our kids, when Courtney would come home and say, well, everybody's getting to blah, 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 and say, I don't think Lou is letting Jake do that. And then when they went on a senior trip, Kristen was one of those seniors, and all we parents came over here to the chapel, and we made a big circle and we prayed over them before they went on their senior trip. It was such a blessing to have those relationships with those like-minded parents. It gave us strength, and it helped us to stand against the evils that were even overcoming our kids at that age. Just real quick, I took some time this week to just interview some parents that have older teens and some middle school and high school teens, as well as kids that are already out of the house, and just got some ideas from what they have done and what they are still doing. One parent told me, keep the conversation open and often. Just talk about it. Have you seen anything? Has anything popped up on your social media? Has a friend showed you anything? Just like you would be asking about what kind of grades are you making this week at school. And take the shame out of it, and pray for their ability to be honest with you. Tell them, if you do see something, don't hide it from me. You're not in trouble. Just report it to me, and we'll help protect you. Tell them that curiosity is normal. It's that sign that your brain is coming online. Those hormones that God created for you to have are beginning to activate. That's not shameful. That's God's design. But what do you do with that curiosity is the question and the conversation. Desire and bodily responses also aren't shameful. They're just signs that your body's working the way God designed it to work. But there has to be a plan for how you handle those bodily responses in that desire. And then one mom told me what she does with her son is they constantly, when they're talking about it, she's humanizing those women in those pictures. That's somebody's mom. That's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's sister. You know, that in the porn industry, a lot of those people that are caught in that are teenagers. Some of them are sex trafficked. Some of them have been given drugs and are being controlled by their drug addiction to do the things they do in those pornographic pictures or those pornographic movies. So just get real with the kids and strip the glamour off of them and tell them the true story of what's happening there. And one mom told me if she could go back with her 18-year-old or 19-year-old, she said she spent so much time focusing on the monitoring. She didn't talk enough about the heart issue and the humanizing people. And she said with her next child that's coming up, she's focusing more on the heart issue and those kind of conversations. She's still monitoring for protection, but she's changed her ratio. She said 80% of her time was spent monitoring with her oldest child, 20% in conversation, and she's flipping that around with her youngest one. So I know we'll talk about some more of these things on the panel. So that's all I have. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Stephanie. So good. I think I was just sat back there listening and just thinking, it's so, sex was meant, as we talked about earlier in the semester, sex was meant as such a gift from God to us to show us his love within marriage. And even in one of the maxims, that it's a bodily renewal of our marriage, our covenant marriage vows. Just like Satan to distort and counterfeit something that God has meant for good. I mean, that's his play. He doesn't have a very long playbook. It's pretty much a few little plays that he's got, and it's always typically to distort what God has made for good. And so important for us as moms to know these attacks of the enemy so that we can come against those and fight those through prayer, through protecting our kids, through talking about the heart issue. I think that's so important. I think one of my boys, he was in middle school, and he said we found out he had been looking at porn, and we thought we had a pretty open conversation about porn and about sex and about purity and everything. But he said when we talked to him about it, after we'd found out that he was looking at things, he was like, I didn't know it was wrong. My friends told me everybody does it. And I was floored. He was like 12. And I was floored that he had not these were good church kids who were telling him it was okay. And so I think, echoing what Stephanie said, it's so important to have that open dialogue from a very young age. One of my boys was exposed at the age of 5. I think I shared that with y'all a couple weeks ago, that at the age of 5, he went to a neighbor's house and they were trying to look up webkins, and they wound up finding themselves on a porn site. And so, it is there. And so we can't control everything. My kids on the bus, even if you have protections on your phone, there's no guarantee that the kids that they're sitting next to on the bus or in school are going to have the same protection. So that open dialogue is so important. And we can only do what we can do. Ultimately, we've got to give them to God, and we've got to be teaching them about the heart issue, like Stephanie was saying, because once you teach them about the heart issue, they then think for themselves. And I think prayer is one of our biggest tools in our arsenal that we can use, which we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But praying, one of my biggest prayers that I've learned with praying over my teens is that for God to reveal the hidden things. And I guarantee you, whenever I pray that, within hours, hidden things are revealed. And sometimes I don't want them to be revealed because I'm like floored by what I'm finding out. For instance, that conversation where we found out that my son had been looking at things, and it truly came from both my husband and I separately that day prayed, Lord, reveal the hidden things, and within hours found out that he was doing that. So that God is our biggest advocate and our biggest, he is cheering us on, and he wants our kids to stay pure. So, okay, now on to the resource of the week. We have several of them, but I did want to talk about a little bit. Stephanie mentioned about some filters that we can have on our phones and devices. A few of those, if you want to jot them down to look at and research, are Bark, Net Nanny, Safe Eyes, and Covenant Eyes. We've used some of those. Some have pros, some have cons. But I would just encourage you to look into those, research. There's several different articles out there of comparing them. You can also use different alternate browsers on their phone. So you can switch off, if they've got an iPhone, switch off Safari and use different browsers such as Canine Protection. We've used that a lot. Where you can put specific filters on that browser so that they cannot access Pornhub. I don't know if you knew this, but Pornhub, I didn't know this before. Pornhub is the widest visited porn site. I didn't realize that. I thought you just type in porn and you'd find it. But no, Pornhub, for you to know this, because sometimes we think we know, but we don't. Pornhub is where you'd find that. There's lots of other sites, but that's the one that is the most frequented. Canine Protection, Pluck Eye, and then Custodio. It's spelled Custodio. That's the one that Stephanie mentioned that her daughter and son-in-law use. So those are some great ones. But Covenant Eyes is one that I would highly recommend. They have several of them have a Christian sort of ethos behind them. But Covenant Eyes is one that sees it as their ministry. And they are a huge resource. They've got not only the app that you can put on your devices, but they also have a whole website with a blog and podcasts. And it's a whole ministry of helping people find freedom from porn addiction, and lots of great articles about parents, how they can have conversations with their kids and all that sort of thing. So the podcast this week, or the resource of this week, is the Covenant Eyes podcast. And this particular podcast, this episode, is a really good one. It's basically just overarching, helping parents navigate a digital world. But these two guys, Daniel Weiss and Josh Glaser, they have written a book called Treading Boldly Through a Pornographic World. I've not read the book, so I can't necessarily recommend it, but they clearly are fairly knowledgeable about it. This episode is really good. They take They share 3 big takeaways that help parents reframe the issue of talking about porn and sex away from what not to do toward living in the goodness of which God created us. So they sort of encourage us as parents to reframe it away from don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, to pointing them to the goodness of the way God created sex and things. So great podcast to listen to, but I would recommend all of their podcasts, that whole pod. There's so many of good ones on there. They got very good guests. They've got Kirk Cameron on one and lots of different people that really good. So check that out. And then also the Covenant Eyes blog. I would highly recommend that. That was going to be the resource of the week, the blog, until I came across this podcast. So anyway. So that's the resource this week. You've got some discussion questions. We don't have a ton of time for discussion questions, but you've got discussion questions to get through there at your table. And then when we come back, we've got a special treat of a panel where we have got some different people. We've got our pastor's wife coming in. We've got somebody from the student ministry coming in. And then Stephanie will also be on the panel to answer any questions. So Molly, could you put up that slide of the number for the Ask the Professional? So as you're talking, if you have questions you want to text in to that number, you can do that. We've got some pre-prepared questions for the panel, but if you have any questions, you can text them to that number. So go ahead and go through your discussion questions now. All right, y'all. Did y'all get through those discussion questions? I did. I don't want to tell on any of the tables, but I did hear a table back there about 2 minutes ago just to get to question 2. So sorry about that. You didn't have enough time. But we have got a great treat. I was told not to say treat, but it is a treat, I think, for us. We have got a panel of, they're a professional of sorts. They definitely are passionate about the topic and know probably more than I do. And probably y'all would agree that you do. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. We will start here. I think y'all are on. We will start here with you. Are you on? Here.
Hello. Okay, I'm Candy Gallaty, and anything else I'm supposed to say? I have 2 boys, Rig 14, Ryder 12, and is that it? What else?
Tell us, you're a little bit. It's on now.
Yeah.
I got the power. You're passionate about. I know you well enough.
Yes.
Now. You are passionate about this subject. So tell us a little bit about kind of
Okay,
why.
so and just kind of on the front end of this, I'll just ask you to keep this kind of in here, just because of the sensitivity of my boys both being in middle school. They're 14 and 12, so. Just please don't go off and share this with a lot of people, your spouse or your family for sure, but just out of the protection for them. But both of my boys have looked at pornography on a regular basis and confessed to me over the last year. And so I've had to just kind of dive head in first and really start figuring out how to handle this, because I was not ready nor prepared for that. And so that's that's really why I'm here, because I've just been learning over the last year and a half on how to handle this and what to do, and just the battle that it is for us and just for people in general. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important, because I just shared with y'all before you got here, Candy, that both of my boys have as well. And I think there's this misconception that it's a dirty thing that only bad kids do.
Right.
But the reality is that's certainly not been the case in my home, and
Right.
clearly not in your home too.
No.
So I mean, I think that in thinking that, we wind up missing,
Yeah.
and kind of not protecting our kids.
Yeah, yeah.
And having the conversations maybe we need to.
Yeah.
So
100%.
yeah, Shane.
I'm Shane Sisk. I'm extremely uncomfortable, just with a lot of ladies in the room. I'm used to students, and so I'm one of the student pastors here. I have been here about 13, 14 years. I've been doing student ministry for 25 plus years, and so I think that's one of the reasons I was asked here. My role here at Long Hollow is family development pastor. And I just think that's the name they gave me because I'm the old guy on staff with kids. And so I've got a junior in high school. It's my daughter, Carson. I've got a freshman in high school, my son, Cutter. And then I have a fifth grader crew in elementary school.
So basically, what he's saying there is he is the most qualified as a professional on this subject.
Not a professional, not a professional.
Yes, when he came in and saw that slide, he wanted to walk out. I think once he saw that he was the professional. So no pressure there, Shane, or any of you. So Stephanie, y'all know Stephanie, and you shared in the beginning about kind of both you're a counselor, but also you've got a history in schools and all of that. So just touch on that again.
Yeah, I have a private counseling practice, but before I moved into private practice 12 years ago, I was the counselor for many years at Beach Elementary and Madison Creek Elementary. And so I've been working with families here in this community for decades now. And also a mom and a grandmother of 8 grandchildren, and 5 of those are middle school age. So, helping my daughters navigate all of this too right now.
Yeah,
As well as in my private practice, helping parents and students and marriages.
Yeah, very good. So I think a really big advantage to hearing from these voices is I know myself as being at the stage of parenting that I'm at now, one of the biggest things I hear is, Mom, no one is as strict as you. Anyone else hear that before? So it's good. I see that strong hand in the back. Yes, we hear it all the time, and if we are not careful, we will listen to our kid's voice, and that becomes the loudest voice we hear, and it starts to impact what we do. And so I think it's really good to hear from other parents, both around your tables, but also here on stage, to let us know that we are not alone, that we maybe don't have the strictest rules around, and that there's a good reason for having these boundaries and rules in place. And so I really wanted to have a panel of people tonight, because I feel like with this subject specifically, because you may go home after this week, hearing this tonight, and be like, you're going to put in more protection probably, and be more mindful, and you're going to hear that even more. Mom, why do we have this? Why do we have this protection here? Why can I not take my phone in places that I used to take my phone? So it's good to hear, I think, touch on these things. So to kick us off, what are some boundaries that you recommend when we're talking about protecting our kids from seeing things they shouldn't on their devices or wherever? Shane, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. There are technological boundaries that you can set, things that you can buy, all types of tech that you can buy. But some of the things that we just do simply is our 2 older kids have phones. They're not allowed to have their phones in the bathroom, and they're not allowed to take their phones in their bedroom. And at night, they plug their phones in downstairs where we are. And going back to what you said, I've had my kids tell me nobody else does this, and it's ridiculous. And the awesome thing is when they have sleepovers, and I tell their friends they have to plug their phones in downstairs. I get some strange looks, but I love it. And the great thing is, I've had parents call me and say, Shane, thank you. We do this in our house, and my kids say nobody else does it. And so when I heard they slept over and you asked them to turn their phones in, it was great. So that's just the technological side of it. I'm probably not the best at, and there's all kinds of things out there. But just from a protection for them side of it, just no phones, no computers, and my kids don't have TVs in their rooms either. And so that's just a very beginning part of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Candy, what about you?
Yeah, I would. All the things that Shane said, we don't have any TVs or computers in the room, no phone, no iPad. They better not bring that thing up the stairs. No. Not in the bathroom. And I will holler at them while they're in the bathroom just to make sure that they don't have it,
So let me clarify. So you're saying that you do not let your kids take devices upstairs in the house where their bedrooms are, and I'm assuming a bonus room.
Correct.
And stuff.
Yes,
Okay.
and any gaming device, because this is what you need to understand. It doesn't matter what the device is. If it's a Kindle, if it's an Oculus Quest, if it's a PS5, if it's an Xbox, it doesn't matter. If it has technology, it can access pornography. And you will think, it's fine, they can read on the Kindle. This is not a big deal. It is a big deal because if they're smart, which they are, they're all smarter than we are today, especially my oldest son. He is so technologically savvy. And you think you can give them a certain device, and it's trash, to be honest with you. And so any device that they have, they're going to be able to access something. So, and I've just had to learn this by trial and error, unfortunately. I would take away device, the next device, oh, well, gotta take that one. Well, next one, gotta take that one, And so I've just learned they can take nothing upstairs. Any gaming computer, anything happens downstairs, like where I am within like eye range of it. And even doing all of that, they can still get around, if I'm not home. And I will just say, because I've got so much on this topic to talk about, but.
Apparently she is the real professional.
So when we as parents, and sometimes we cannot help this, but are extremely busy or absent from the home for an extended period of time for whatever reason. So when I caught our oldest, it was the week my dad died. I had been at the hospital all week, all day long, because we were there with Chris Swain, who was in the hospital about to die. So for hours, I'm there every day, Robbie's there every day, and the boys were at home. And even though people were looking in on them and watching after them, that is when Rig was looking. And I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. So, and he later said, I needed you at home, and you weren't there. And I think he felt like because there wasn't supervision like from me or Robbie, that he was kind of left in a vulnerable place and then looked and then looked again. And so that's a whole nother thing, another aspect to this that I've learned. The more I'm away for whatever reason is going to leave him in a place where mom's eyes aren't on him as much. Therefore, he might feel like he can look or get away with something or whatever. But anyway, so
what does that look like then when you're gone? I'm assuming they stay home on their own. Are they allowed access to their devices when you're gone?
Okay, so they are just now allowed to be at home, if I'm not here or have to run somewhere, up until just a couple months ago when because my mom would be there and she could go in and look, and she knew what to look for, But anytime we're gone away and someone is staying with them, whoever is staying with them knows to watch for that. And so as far as computers and all that stuff. And so as far as devices right now, if I'm not there, they do have their devices. We've protected the network as much as we possibly can. Not to say that they can find their way. And I will tell you what, they are so smart that you can, or I can, search until I am blue in the face and I can never find what they have viewed. Just pray that you don't have a technological savvy child, okay? Because I do, unfortunately. He just knows these things. And I'm like, how do you do this? And he goes, oh, well, it's easy. I just turn Wi-Fi off or this or that. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I should have known that, who knew, Now I do. So now I tell all my mom friends, whatever you do, don't give them the device, because they would not have cellular device on their phones, but they could just easily anyway, they just know, they're just smart. They're just smart.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I love the boundaries that you have in place, because I think we've got some very similar boundaries, and it's hard to implement, especially the phones upstairs thing. That's very hard because you'll get things like, oh, it was just in my pocket. Or, and bathrooms, same thing. Oh, it was just in my pocket. I'm not even looking at it. And so then it's very hard. It gets very gray, in some of those. So anyway, but I think something to remember, and this week we're talking a little bit about devices, and next week we're going to talk a lot about devices and protection on devices and things, not just about porn, but about social media and things. But I think something to remember that I say to my kids all the time is that phones are a privilege. They're not an expectation. And I think when we think of phones and devices as an expectation, we're much more likely to be cautious about the rules that we put in place because we feel bad. But when we think of them as a privilege, it gives us free rein to say, I'm sorry, if you want it, this is what it's going to look like. If not, if you don't want it this way, I'm not paying for it. You're not going to have it. So you have a lot of power, more power than what you realize. And these are things that you want to start implementing. If you've got really little kids, you want to start implementing these things like no phones or no devices in certain areas. That's really important from a very young age. From the very first device, we said nothing in bedrooms. Yeah. So they knew, even when they were super little, because we knew that eventually we would have that rule in place so that we could then implement that with much more strength once they were older. So Stephanie, as a counselor, and maybe too as a mom and grandma, what would you say are good boundaries to have in place?
Well, early on in my grandmother role, when the kids would come spend the night with me, they would bring the devices. So one of my son-in-laws had, and he works in technology, so he knows these things, and he explains it to me what I need to do to help protect them. But they would have to come and ask me for extra time because he would set something, and then I would have to get in a private place in the house, talk to him on the phone, get the device, set the settings. So I don't know what I was doing, but I was helping to protect them. But it worked.
Whatever it was good.
Yeah. I was just following directions.
So basically, if you could all give us Grady's number, that would be really
Grady can talk you through anything. Yes.
Yeah. No, what she's saying is so good because my encouragement would be to hold off as long as absolutely possible before you give your child a phone or a device like that. We held off till 8th grade. Rig turned 14, and the only reason I relented and gave him the phone was because he was going to a new school further away, and I didn't want him getting stuck, like if they canceled football practice or something and having no way to contact me. It just made me nervous. So we gave him the phone. But in doing that, I set up all of his stuff on that phone. So like his Apple ID, he doesn't know his Apple ID. I know the Apple ID. And so if he wants to download anything on the phone, it's actually part of my Social Security number, the code. So he has no idea. So he has to bring it to me anytime because I wanted to know what is he putting on the phone, what is he asking to download. So he knows none of those things. And he's like, I can't believe I got to bring this phone to you every single time. And I'm like, I know, I love it. Like, it's the best. And so he has to bring it to me. And then that way, and the same thing, I have to approve the time. So I've set a boundary on his time. Like you have to put the phone up at 7:30 at night and you don't get it until 7:30 in the morning. And he'll always want to go outside of those limits. Do you know what I mean? But he has to bring it to me in order for that to happen. And so that was one way I could safeguard for him somewhat, is having to me putting in those codes and he doesn't know those things.
Well, and I think too, I think it's really beyond just prevention of them looking at accessing sites and things that they shouldn't. I think they actually, whether they realize it or not, it's very healthy for them to have these boundaries and have time when their brains can breathe and be the way God designed them to be. I hear, because my kids have to do the same as Shane's kids, they have to turn in their phones. They are in my bedroom at night, plugged in my bedroom, so that even up until the age of 18, when my son turned 18, he got his phone, but because I wanted him to know how to deal with that before he went to college. But the thing is that they are in my room. I know where they're at. They don't like it, but they know they have to do it. And I think it's really good when I hear my kids' friends talking about or when I look through their texts sometimes, and I see that kids are texting all night long, I'm like, that poor child, they never get a chance to switch off. So I think it's really, really healthy, even for their psyche. I mean, you could probably speak into that.
Well, and you're teaching that lesson. That is one of the most important lessons we need as humans, is how to say no to ourselves. And they're getting to practice that by you modeling how to say no.
Yeah, that's good.
And then your external voice becomes their internal voice is the goal as they age.
Yeah, that's good.
When one of the nights, Carson had some soccer buddies sleep over, and I made them put in their phones downstairs, and then the next morning we're sitting there at breakfast, and one of the girls goes, "That was the best night's sleep I've had in forever." And I said, "You know why?" I said, "Because you weren't scrolling all night." I said, it's pretty awesome, isn't it? She goes, no, I missed my phone. And I was like, all right. I said, but at least you know you slept well. And so I know this isn't a technology type one, but I thought that was interesting. I thought it was interesting that she just on her own goes, wow, I had a great night's sleep.
Yeah.
And it was literally because her mind was able to shut down.
Yeah, they don't have the ability in place to be as self-controlled as what an adult would be. So I think it's up to us to help them to put those boundaries in place. Okay, so moving on, we have about 10 minutes left, and we've only gotten through one question. So table back there, we're right there with you. Okay, so do you use, we talked about some filters and things. Just curious if y'all use those in your house, and maybe share what you use so that...
We use Covenant Eyes, and I mean, Robbie may have other things on the devices, but I know of that one for sure. And that way we get emails of the sites or like anything fishy pops up or something like that.
That's good. Shane?
We don't. Everything we have, though, is locked down through, Kristen can control it through Apple, her Apple ID and all that stuff. And then like my computer's the church computer, Kristen's computer's a work computer. And then we don't really have any other computers in the house, so it's phones and iPods, and those are all controlled through Apple, her Apple information.
Okay, and Stephanie, you don't know.
Well, as a grandparent, we don't at our house, but like I described, and
Yeah.
the other set, they've used Bark, they've used other.
Yeah.
So they're kind of monitoring even though they're at my house.
Yeah, that's good. What parental settings do you use on streaming services, or do you? Like Netflix, cable TV. Are there any, do you use PIN protection? What sort of?
We have different settings. Unfortunately, just with Netflix, with Hulu, you've got, there's my setting, and then there's a kid setting, and kids almost always click on my setting. Not like trying to be sneaky, but just doing it. And the thing we have to, we don't think about is things like Netflix. There's pretty much softcore porn on Netflix. And so even, unless you do have it locked down for the kids and they can't get to yours, which if that's a possibility, I'm not sure of, they're still able to get to things. And so we have, like Candy talked about, they're not allowed to download anything on their devices unless we know about it. But the scary thing is, and Kenny said this earlier, there are sites that you would never imagine that they could get to pornography on. There's things that the ESPN app. My son loves basketball. He's always checking out sports. He's always checking out different things. But through the ESPN app, he was able to get to some stuff. And it wasn't porn, but I went, wait, how did you get to that? And he goes, it's through my app. I just kept clicking a button that was an advertisement or that was this, and it brought me here. And so those are the things that you would think need to be locked down or even can lock down, they have access to.
Yeah. Stephanie, you were talking about that with...
Yeah, Mom told me recently that her child was wanting to use Bing for the search engine. And she was like, okay. And he just kept wanting to use Bing. Then she found out when he pulled up Bing, he could have the thumbnail that would play the whole pornographic video and not even have to go into the site. And then I've had parents show up at my office, that Instagram. This has been a few years when Instagram first came out. And they thought it was so innocent for their son to be on, and he had fallen into that rabbit hole of porn. And it had become an addiction for him.
A really good tip at night is to actually turn off the Wi-Fi. We have Xfinity, but that's our internet provider, and I can actually go in and it's scheduled to turn off the Wi-Fi at night, because what we would find is my kids would find old devices in drawers that weren't used anymore, and they would have them and sneak them in their bedroom. And so if I turn off, that means they can't watch anything on TV. They can't watch any device. They can't do anything because they've got no connection to the outside world. So I would highly recommend doing that, or you can buy things. I mean, initially, before I knew the Xfinity would do that, I would go and unplug the router at bedtime. So there's ways that you can do that, and I would highly recommend doing that so they have no connection to the outside world. If you've got their phone, there's no other way they can get to the outside world. So what are some ways, because obviously I think more and more our kids are being driven to technology for their friendships, for their interactions. So I think one way to counteract some of that is to encourage in-person, real-life fun. So what are some ways that we can, as parents, encourage kind of real-life interactions so that they're not always driven to their device? Shane, you're the expert.
I mean, for us, it's simple things. It's no phones at the dinner table. When we're in the car, unless it is my rule is unless it's over 2 hours, you can't be on your phone, playing games or scrolling through things. But even, great example. Today, my wife took a group of basketball players down to Franklin for their basketball game, and they all get in the car and they all get on the phones. I mean, they're literally sitting shoulder to shoulder, and they're on their phones. And so when it's me, I just go, all right, everybody put your phones down. And once again, they're like, this guy's lost his mind. But I'm like, we're going to talk to each other. Yeah. It's okay, guys. And even for me, like, I don't turn the radio on when I have my kids in the car. Now, there's times on longer trips where we're singing and playing, but I'm just like, hey, let's talk to each other. Let's find out. And listen to me, parents, mamas. Parents. There's no dads in here except for me. All right, mamas. There's going to be awkward moments of silence. That's okay. Embrace that. Don't fear that. Don't fear that silence, because that silence is what makes you go, all right, you can get on your phone. But embrace it and let them sit there quietly for a minute, because here's what's going to happen. They're either going to talk, they're going to fall asleep, all right, or something's going to happen to engage in conversation. But when we get nervous because it's silent, then all of a sudden we panic and we go, all right, you guys can be on your phones. Don't do that. Don't do that. Embrace that silence. Embrace that moment. But I challenge you guys, it's easy, especially with younger ones. With younger ones, it's easy to put a device in their hand and go, okay, I'm busy. I'm trying to do this. Like my youngest, my fifth grader, Crew, God bless him. Both of my other kids, I'm like, hey, how was your day? And both my other kids will be like, Dad, it was good. It was bad. It was, all right, and then that's all I get out of him. And then I'll keep asking questions, digging. Crew's my one who, hey, buddy, how was your day? All right, Dad, I got to school. And then he will tell me second by second of his day. And so sometimes as parents, we get going and we're busy and we go, all right, not right now, here, take this. Don't do that. Don't do that. Take that time to listen. Take that time. Or just say, hey, let me finish this. You can go do chores, or you can go read, and then we'll come back and talk about this. But I think engaging in that conversation, and if you talk to my kids, they'll tell you, Dad doesn't listen to radio in the car. I don't do that so we can talk.
Yeah.
I love music. I love listening to music, but I want us to talk. I want us to engage. And then I also do it when their friends are in the car.
Yeah. So is that something you always had, or just once they got a little bit older and you were like, oh, I probably need to implement this?
I think I've always done it just because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss moments. And so the car ride from here to school is 5 minutes for me, but it's time to just talk. Yeah. It's time to just, hey, ask questions. Yeah. And sometimes you get one-word answers, and sometimes you hit on something where they go, and they start running. And you just listen. That's the other thing. When you get a group of them in your car, you just listen. Like, you don't even have to engage in the conversation. But when you listen, all of a sudden you're hearing stuff. You're like, oh, they're dating each other? Okay, cool. All right. And you're finding out stuff. But then you're also able to understand where some of these kids are coming from and what they're dealing with. And so that helps you, because now kids who are hanging out with your kids and what's going on in their homes and what they're dealing with. And so it's just helpful.
Yeah, that's so good. I think it's so helpful for no matter what age our kids are, because I think even if you are not yet to the age where they're going to converse with you, you are building habits, even for yourself. You're building habits how you will interact. And you are also creating expectations for moments. If you're just always on your phone or always handing them your phone when they're 2 and 3, they're going to expect them to always be on their phone. Like, it drives me crazy, probably knowing y'all, you're the same way. When I go to a restaurant and I see those little pay devices that have also kids' stuff on them, and I'm like, we put it under the table. We're like, seriously, let's have a family meal, you know? And I think that's just kind of baseline of when we should put away phones. Okay, moving on. If our kids are past the age of 12, we could probably assume they've been exposed to pornography. If they've never brought up the subject to us, should we bring it up to them? If so, how?
I say yes, because they have been exposed or they're about to be exposed. And not talking sends a message that there's something shameful, something that is taboo, and it's not taboo.
So what do you think that should look like? If that has never been a conversation that's been approached, you're not even sure if they're aware of the word porn, which they probably are. But what does that look like? How would you say how do you get that conversation going?
Well, I think just ask them like you would ask how they're doing. How are your grades? What kind of grades are you making? Have you seen anything? Has there been anything shown to you, or have you seen anything that made you feel uncomfortable, or that was, and then explain what porn is. They need to know. You want it, and tell them, I'm the expert on porn in your life. Nobody else is. So come and ask me. I'm the expert on sex. Come and ask me. Nobody knows any more than I know, especially your friends, and you don't want that kind of education to come from the lunchroom table.
Yeah.
Oh, because it will.
Candy, you mentioned something earlier when we were talking about you noticed, you didn't realize what it was, but you noticed some signs beforehand.
Yeah, and I would say even before 12, I think they're definitely being exposed. So, and I mean, I can only speak from our experience, but I hear it's just as bad for girls coming up as it is for boys. But Ryder was looking at stuff when he was 11. I did not know that. I was so consumed with what Rig was doing and going through, so I was really focused on that. And I was really at that point with Rig, I was mad because I realized what a spiritual battle that it was. And so one day I was on the phone with Robbie, and I mean, I was just going to town. I was so mad. And I said the word pissed, okay? I said,
Anti-gality.
I know. So I said to Robbie, while I'm like on speakerphone, that I don't know, I'm on speakerphone, have no idea Rig's in the car. And I'm like, I am so mad at Satan. I'm like, I am pissed off. I'm like, this is war. And Rig's like, Mom? And I'm like, hey, love. And so now listen to this. Rig cannot believe his mom said pissed off. I mean, that's like the biggest cuss word in the world to him right now, you know? And I'm like, wait a second, hold on. You're upset with me because I have said PISS with what you've been doing? Like, come on now, honey. But I was so consumed and I was mad because I was like, Satan is trying to take my child out, you know? I was so mad. And so I was dealing with all of that, never, ever, ever in a million years thinking that Ryder, innocent as he could be, he ain't, just not even a thought in my head. He goes to middle school camp, comes back from middle school camp, and I could have tell that he was very like agitated and ornery and like aggravated. And I thought, well, maybe it's just hormones or something, like something that he's going through kind of a thing. Never realizing that he was in sin and he was upset about it, feeling guilty about it, and so therefore it was coming out in his attitude and stuff like that. And so when he comes home from middle school camp, he had been home for about a week. And I go upstairs. I could tell like something was off with him that day, like he wanted to tell me something, but again, last thought in my head. And I sat down on the bed, was folding some clothes, and he said, Mom, I need to tell you something. And I said, okay. And he said, I've been looking at pornography. And he knew what it was because we'd been dealing with this with Rig. And I was crushed. Because, I mean, with Rig, I was mad. I was like, not mad at Rig, I was mad at Satan. And then when Ryder, I was literally crushed and sobbed like a baby in front of him because I couldn't even help it. I was so upset. And he was 11 years old, my innocent little Ryder, and it's like, how does this happen, And it just happens. They're younger and younger when it's happening. And thank Jesus, they both have told me and felt conviction over this and have come forward. And I'm like, this is the first step to victory, people, because if they will speak it out loud, I've told them before, you keep it in secret, Satan wins. The moment you put it out there, he begins to lose power. And so we've told him, you come to us, we talk about this, and we will try to pursue victory together, in this, which is why we put all the boundaries, which is why we do all the things that we do, like to try to protect them.
Yeah, that's good. Let's let what I was saying earlier about praying that God would reveal the hidden things in your kids. Definitely, I've found the same exact thing.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we need to wrap up here, but I definitely wanted to cover this because we've had this question also. Can you give us some tips on how to encourage boundaries without sending the message that they hear as they're dirty-minded or they can't be trusted?
I think one of the biggest parts is helping them understand why that's bad, and helping them understand who they are in Christ. One of the biggest things I think my daughter, who's a junior, wrestles with is her identity in Christ, understanding that whether it's with boys or whether what she looks at or what she listens to, that as a child of Christ, those things should offend us. And so just talking through that constantly with them and affirming our love for them, that how much Christ loves them, but let them know why you're setting those boundaries. Why you set boundaries is important. Helping them understand is to protect them. Now, they're not going to understand that until later, but constantly saying, this is so you will not have to wrestle with things. This is so you will not have to deal with this in the future. But I think that's a big part is their identity in Christ, and how much they are valued, and how much the people who are on those videos Christ values. And when we look at those things, it dishonors them, it dishonors Christ. And so, but setting that up to where it's not you're a dirty person, but this tears down who we are in Christ.
Yeah,
I think that's
good.
a big part.
That's good. Anything to add, y'all?
Well, just taking the shame out of them. It's normal. You have hormones. You're going to be curious. But what do you do with your curiosity? It's normal to feel attraction, and it's normal to have your body respond to that attraction. But what do you do with those things? And there's nothing to be ashamed of. Come and talk to me.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Candy?
I think they've said it all, and I mean, I would just say pursue help if you find that your child is in that. We had ours in counseling for different things, and that was one of the things that I wanted them to talk to somebody, a Christian counselor a man that could kind of speak into that. So
yeah, that's good. We've had a question I do want to touch on. How would you handle if your kids are out of the house? So I assume they're grown, over the age of 18, and you've never had that conversation with them. Should you bring it up at that point, or leave it because they're grown?
Well, I think it's always okay to ask your adult children, can you share something with them? Ask permission before you just dive in on it. And if they're willing to hear your wisdom on it, then go for it. Yes.
Yeah, and I would say, as a mom, I cannot tell you how many times throughout this process the Lord has prompted my heart to ask Rig or Ryder, hey, what are you looking at? Or, hey, what are you doing? Or, mother's intuition, Holy Spirit, will speak. And there's never been a time where I have felt prompted that it was unwarranted. Do you know what I mean? So I think as a mom, no matter how old your child is, if you feel through prayer that the Spirit wants you to talk to your child, then there's a reason for that, and I would obey that, you know? I mean, the best case scenario, they said, I've never even struggled with that. Worst case scenario, they actually say that they have, and then that opens up a whole nother conversation. But I would just obey any prompting that you feel that God might be leading you to do, because I believe it's probably the Spirit.
That's good. That's good. So as we wrap up, anything at all, final words from any of y'all on advice, tips, anything as we close out this conversation on pornography and talking about our children?
I think for me, and I was going to say this in a prior question, is so when our kids are heading into sixth grade, for my daughter, my wife took her on a trip, and they had the sex talk. They had all of those different conversations. I did the same thing with Cutter, and then this summer, as Crew's finishing fifth grade, about to go into sixth grade, we're going to go take a trip somewhere, and it's something simple, and we're just going to have that same conversation. One of the things I did is for the boys, and I think you can do this for the ladies, is I had some men in Cutter's life just write letters to him, just about things that they thought were important and what it's like to be a godly young man. And then having him read those letters, and then we would talk about them. And some would talk about dating, some would talk about sex, some brought up pornography, and it was a good intro for me to go, hey, let's talk about that. Do you know what that is? So one of my boys had no clue. Crew, who's my fifth grader, actually knows because he's seen stuff as a fifth grader that his older brother did not see. And so have those conversations, because we just recently did a series here at the church called Did God Really Say? And we mimicked that series here in the middle school room and in the high school room. And in the middle school room, we had kids who had never heard the word, and then we had kids who were struggling with it and addicted to it. And so the thing I want to encourage you to is have those conversations when the time is right. And unfortunately, for those of you who have younger kids, that time's getting earlier and earlier to have those conversations. And so make sure you're paying attention. Make sure you're aware. And I think one of the greatest things that Candy said is being aware, checking things. All right? When you hand a child a device, understand you have the right to take it away. You have the right to check it. You have the right to put any parameter you want on it. And do not let them tell you anything different.
Yeah, that's good.
So good. I would say, too, everything that Shane said, ditto. And I would really just work on building that relationship with your children to where they feel comfortable coming to you, because, some kids don't have like open dialogue with their parents. Maybe they feel uncomfortable. They don't, I don't know what the reasonings are, but work on building that with your children from as young as they are, as they grow, because that is one thing I'm thankful for, is that Rig and Ryder both can come to me and tell me, and they will tell me anything, if you know what I'm saying. And a lot of times I'm like, we need to talk to your daddy about that, because I don't understand. I'm not a male, right? So, but they will come to me and tell me anything, and I'm so glad for that. So I try to stay composed, and then like go in the bathroom and freak out, I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe they just told me this. But I'm just like, okay, all right, let's talk to daddy. But you want them to come to you, because you definitely don't want them going to anybody else, like Stephanie was saying. So anyway, just building that with them to where they feel like, I can come to mom and dad with anything. It doesn't matter what it is. I can trust them and I can talk to them about that. That's the best thing I think you can do is build that with your kids.
Yeah, that's good. Stephanie?
One thing I want to say that's encouraging is that, yes, we're fighting the battle on the home front, as Candy was saying. The devil's after my child. But God is raising up people fighting on a national level, like the National Coalition of Sexual Abuse, Sexual Exploitation. They are on the front. Some of y'all are shaking your head. You know about their work and what they're doing, and like they got free porn movies taken out of, I think, Marriott hotels. They're just constantly confronting the evil that's trying to take over our culture. So God is raising up warriors and defenders of our children in our homes as us in that role as parents and grandparents, but he's raising up a standard against the flood that the enemy is bringing in.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. Well, y'all, we could sit and talk more. I'm sure we could talk about this for a long time, but thank you all so much for your vulnerability and for sharing with us your wisdom, because whether you realize it or not, you do know a lot about the topic. So y'all put your hands together and thank them for joining us.